90 German soldiers stand in a semicircle, rifles aimed at one American paratrooper. A submachine gun presses into his stomach. His own men are on their knees, hands up, surrounded. The German officer smiles and demands surrender. The American looks around, sees the odds, and does something no one expects. He laughs. 45 seconds later, 21 Germans are dead, and the rest are begging for mercy. This is the story of First Sergeant Leonard Funk, the man who turned certain death into legendary victory with nothing but a moment of madness and a storm of bullets. January 1945. The snow in eastern Belgium lies thick and silent, broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant rumble of artillery. The Battle of the Bulge is winding down, but the war is far from over. Adolf Hitler's desperate winter offensive has shattered the American front, leaving thousands dead and entire units scattered across frozen forests and bombed-out villages. The 82nd Airborne Division, elite paratroopers trained to jump behind enemy lines and fight outnumbered, has been thrown into the chaos to hold the line. They are exhausted, undersupplied, and bleeding men every day, but they do not break. Among them is First Sergeant Leonard A. Funk, Jr., a 25-year-old from Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Funk is not tall, not loud, not the type of soldier who looks like a hero in the movies. He is compact, quiet, with sharp eyes and a calm voice. But those who serve with him know the truth. Funk is a fighter. He has already fought across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and Normandy. He has jumped into enemy fire twice, survived ambushes, led raids, and pulled wounded men from burning buildings. By January 1945, he wears a silver star and 2 bronze stars. His men call him Sergeant Funk, and they follow him without question because he has never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. Funk's unit, Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, is tasked with clearing German forces from small towns and villages east of the Somme River. The mission is simple on paper, but brutal in reality. Every house could hide a sniper. Every barn could conceal a machine gun nest. Every road could be mined. The Germans are retreating, yes, but they are not defeated. Some units fight to the last man. Others surrender in groups, hands high, faces gray with cold and hunger. You never know which kind you will meet until it is too late. On the morning of January 29th, Funk and a small squad move into the town of Holzheim. The place is quiet, almost eerie. Smoke rises from a few chimneys. The snow is undisturbed in places, trampled and muddy in others. Intel says the Germans have pulled back, but Funk does not trust Intel. He trusts his instincts. He signals his men to spread out and move carefully. They enter the town in pairs, checking doorways, scanning windows, listening for the scrape of metal or the click of a safety being released. Within an hour, they find them. A cluster of German soldiers, maybe 15 or 20, huddled in a farmhouse basement. They are cold, hungry, and out of ammunition. When Funk's men kick in the door and shout commands, the Germans raise their hands immediately. No fight, no drama, just surrender. Funk orders his men to search them, take their weapons, and march them to a collection point in the center town where other prisoners are being held. It is routine, boring, even, but Funk knows that routine is when soldiers get careless, and carelessness kills. He assigns 2 men to guard the prisoners and moves on with the rest of his squad to clear the northern edge of town. The work is slow. They check every building, every shed, every cellar. They find more Germans, all willing to surrender. By midday, Funk's small collection point has grown. There are now 90 German prisoners sitting in the snow behind a stone wall in the town square, guarded by just 4 American paratroopers. Funk does not like the numbers, but he has no choice. Every available man is needed to keep pushing forward. He tells his guards to stay alert, keep their weapons ready, and call for help if anything feels wrong. Then Funk hears gunfire from the east. Not close, but not far either. A sharp crackle of rifles, then the heavy thump of a German machine gun. One of his squads is in contact. He grabs 3 men and moves toward the sound, leaving the prisoners behind with the guards. It is a calculated risk, but it is necessary. The fight to the east lasts 20 minutes. By the time Funk and his men return, The shooting has stopped. They have taken no casualties, but they are tired, dirty, and running low on ammunition. As Funk approaches the town square, something feels off. The street is too quiet. He cannot see his guards. He cannot hear voices. He slows his pace, raises his Thompson submachine gun, and signals his men to spread out. Then he rounds the corner and stops cold. 90 German soldiers are no longer sitting. They are standing. They are armed, and they are surrounding 4 American paratroopers who are now on their knees, hands on their heads, faces pale with shock and fear. In the center of the group stands a German officer, tall and thin, holding a Schmeisser submachine gun. His eyes lock onto Funk. He smiles. Funk's mind races. What happened is obvious. A German counterattack force, small but aggressive, swept into town from the north while Funk was away. They overpowered the guards, freed the prisoners, rearmed them with cached weapons hidden in the town, and now control the square. Funk and his 3 men are outnumbered 30-1. The Germans have the high ground, the firepower, and the element of surprise. Funk's Thompson is slung across his chest, not shouldered. His men are 10 feet behind him, exposed in the open street. If shooting starts, they will all die in seconds. The German officer steps forward. He speaks decent English, his voice calm and almost polite. He tells Funk to lower his weapon and order his men to surrender. He says the war is over for them. He says no one needs to die today. He gestures to the 4 American prisoners on their knees and says they are already captured. He says resistance is pointless. He raises his Schmeisser and presses the barrel into Funk's stomach. Funk does not move. He looks at the officer, then at the 90 Germans, then at his own men on their knees. He knows the odds. He knows the doctrine. When surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned, you surrender to save lives. But Funk also knows something else. He knows about Normandy. 3 weeks earlier, during the height of the Bulge, German SS troops captured over 100 American soldiers near the Belgian town of Normandy. The Americans surrendered. They were disarmed, lined up in a field, and machine-gunned. 84 men died in the snow, some shot while trying to crawl away. Others finished off with pistols to the head. The massacre spread through the American ranks like wildfire. Every paratrooper, every rifleman, every tanker heard the story. The message was clear. Surrender to the SS, and you die anyway. Funk does not know if the officer in front of him is SS. He does not know if these Germans will honor the rules of war or repeat Normandy. But he knows one thing with absolute certainty. If he surrenders, he loses control. If he loses control, his men die. And Leonard Funk does not let his men die. So he does the only thing that makes no sense. He laughs. It is not a nervous laugh. It is not a bitter laugh. It is loud, sudden, and completely unexpected. The German officer blinks, confused. The soldiers around him exchange glances. For a split second, no one moves. They do not understand. Is the American insane? Is this some kind of trick? Why is he laughing when a gun is pressed into his stomach? Funk uses that second. His right hand drops to the pistol grip of his Thompson. His left hand swings the barrel up and to the side, knocking the German Schmeisser away from his body. Before the officer can react, Funk squeezes the trigger. The Thompson roars. The officer's chest explodes in a spray of red. He drops like a puppet with cut strings. Chaos erupts. The Germans closest to Funk raise their rifles. But Funk is already moving. He pivots left, firing in short bursts, spraying the semicircle of soldiers. The Thompson holds 30 rounds, and Funk empties half the magazine in seconds. Men scream. Bodies fall. The snow turns red. Funk's 3 men react instantly. They drop to prone positions and open fire with their M1 Garens, picking off Germans who turn to run or raise weapons. The 4 American prisoners, still on their knees, throw themselves flat and roll toward cover. The Germans, leaderless and stunned, panic. Some try to shoot back, but cannot find targets in the chaos. Others drop their weapons and raise their hands. A few bolt toward the alleys, only to be cut down by rifle fire. Funk reloads. His hands are steady. His face is calm. He walks forward, firing again methodical and precise. A German sergeant tries to rally his men, shouting orders in harsh, clipped German. Funk shoots him twice in the chest. The sergeant collapses against a stone wall, slides down, and stops moving. The entire engagement lasts 45 seconds. When the shooting stops, 21 German soldiers are dead or dying in the snow. The rest, 69 men, throw down their weapons and raise their hands high, shouting "Comrade" over and over, the universal plea for mercy. Funk's men moving quickly, kicking rifles away, shouting commands, forcing the prisoners back into formation. The 4 American guards, shaken but alive, retrieve their weapons and help secure the scene. Funk stands in the center of the square, breathing hard, his Thompson still smoking. He looks at the bodies, then at the prisoners, then at his own men. No Americans are dead. 2 have minor wounds from ricochets. That is all. Funk reloads his Thompson again, chambers a round, and slings it over his shoulder. He does not smile. He does not celebrate. He simply nods to his men and says, "Get them moving. We are not done yet." Word of what happened spreads through the 82nd Airborne within hours. Soldiers who were not there swear they heard the story from someone who was. Officers request reports. Witnesses are interviewed. The numbers are confirmed. 1 American paratrooper, surrounded by 90 armed Germans, refused to surrender, killed 21 in less than a minute, and forced the rest to give up. It sounds impossible. It sounds like propaganda. But it is true. Funk's company commander, Captain John D. Creamer, writes a detailed after-action report and submits a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The paperwork moves up the chain of command, reviewed by battalion, regiment, division, and corps. Eyewitnesses testify. The German prisoners are interrogated. Every detail is verified. In September 1945, 6 months after the war in Europe ends, First Sergeant Leonard Funk, Jr. is awarded the Medal of Honor by President Harry S. Truman in a ceremony at the White House. The citation reads, in part, that Funk refused to surrender despite overwhelming odds, opened fire on enemy forces at point-blank range, killed 21 enemy soldiers, and forced the remainder to surrender, thereby saving the lives of his fellow paratroopers and preventing an enemy counterattack. It is the highest award for valor in the United States military, and Funk becomes one of the most decorated soldiers of World War II. But Funk does not talk much about Holzheim after the war. He returns to Pennsylvania, works as a salesman, raises a family, and lives a quiet life. When reporters ask him about the moment he laughed in the face of death, he shrugs and says he does not remember laughing. He says he only remembers thinking that he had no choice. He says he knew that if he hesitated, his men would die, and that was not acceptable. He says he did what any sergeant would do. Take care of your men. Fight when you must. Never quit. Leonard Funk dies in 1992 at the age of 72. He is buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His Medal of Honor citation is displayed at the 82nd Airborne Division War Memorial Museum at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Veterans who served with him remember him not as a superhero, but as a quiet professional who led by example and never asked his men to take risks he would not take himself. The story of Holzheim is more than a tale of one man's courage. It is a lesson in leadership, in the power of decisiveness, and in the refusal to accept defeat even when logic says you should. Funk was not stronger than 90 Germans. He was not faster. He was not better armed. But he had something they did not. He had the will to act when action seemed impossible. He had the clarity to see that surrender meant death, and the courage to choose violence over compliance. In military doctrine, there is a concept called the ODA loop developed by fighter pilot John Boyd. It stands for observe, orient, decide, act. The side that completes the loop faster wins. At Holzheim, Funk collapsed the loop into a single second. He observed the threat. He oriented to reality that surrender was not an option. He decided to fight, and he acted before the Germans could finish their own loop. That speed, that decisiveness, turned a certain massacre into a legendary victory. But there is something deeper here, something that goes beyond tactics and training. Funk's laugh was not just a distraction. It was a psychological weapon. Laughter in the face of death breaks expectations. It creates confusion. It forces the enemy to pause, to question, to hesitate. And in combat, hesitation is fatal. The German officer expected fear. He expected compliance. He did not expect humor. That unexpected response bought Funk the fraction of a second he needed to turn the tables. This is the paradox of courage. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act despite fear, to function when the mind is screaming to freeze or flee. Funk was afraid. He later admitted that he thought he was going to die, but he did not let fear control him. He controlled fear. He channeled it into action, and that made all the difference. The men Funk saved at Holzheim went on to fight in the final months of the war. Some survived, some did not, but they all remembered the day their sergeant laughed at death and won. They told the story to their children and grandchildren. They told it at reunions and memorials. They told it because it mattered. It mattered because it proved that one person in the right moment with the right mindset can change the outcome of a battle. It mattered because it showed that heroism is not about being fearless. It is about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Funk's actions also highlight a harsh truth about war. In combat, mercy can be a luxury you cannot afford. Funk did not shoot 21 men because he was cruel or because he enjoyed killing. He shot them because they were armed, dangerous, and standing between him and the survival of his men. The German officer who pressed a gun into Funk's stomach made a fatal mistake. He assumed the American would surrender. He assumed compliance. He assumed wrong. And that assumption cost him his life and the lives of 20 of his soldiers. This is not a story that glorifies violence. It is a story that recognizes the brutal reality of war. When you are surrounded, outnumbered, and seconds from death, you do not have the luxury of debate. You do not have time to consider philosophy or morality. You have time to act or die. Funk chose to act. He chose to fight. And because he did, his men lived. There's also a lesson here about leadership. Funk was not an officer. He was a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer, a soldier who led from the front lines rather than from a command post. But his leadership in that moment was absolute. His men did not question his decision to fight. They did not hesitate. They followed his lead instantly because they trusted him. That trust was earned over months and years of shared danger, of Funk proving again and again that he would never abandon them, never ask them to do something he would not do, and never quit no matter how bad things got. Leadership in combat is not about rank or authority. It is about trust. It is about proving that you will do whatever it takes to bring your people home. Funk earned that trust by jumping into Normandy under fire, by fighting through Sicily and Italy, by sharing every hardship and danger his men faced. When the moment came at Holzheim, his men did not need orders. They knew what to do because they knew Funk would never surrender, and neither would they. The story of Leonard Funk also challenges our assumptions about heroism. We like to think of heroes as larger-than-life figures, men and women who are somehow different from the rest of us. But Funk was not different. He was a salesman from Pennsylvania who joined the army because his country needed him. He was not a natural warrior. He was a man who learned to fight because he had to, who learned to lead because his men needed him, and who learned to kill because the enemy gave him no choice. He did not seek glory. He did not want to be famous. He just wanted to do his job and bring his men home. That is what makes his story so powerful. It is not a story about a superhero. It is a story about an ordinary man who found himself in an extraordinary situation and chose to act with extraordinary courage. It is a reminder that heroism is not reserved for the special few. It is available to anyone who is willing to stand up, take responsibility, and do what must be done, no matter the cost. Funk's Medal of Honor citation hangs in the Pentagon, alongside the citations of thousands of other American heroes. But the real legacy of Leonard Funk is not in a piece of paper or a medal. It is in the lives he saved. It is in the children and grandchildren of the men who survived Holzheim because their sergeant refused to quit. It is in the example he set for every soldier who has worn the uniform since. Example that says no matter how bad things get, no matter how impossible the odds, you never give up. You fight. You lead. You protect your people. And you never, ever surrender. The winter of 1945 is long over. The snow has melted. The bodies are buried. The The town of Holzheim is quiet again, rebuilt and peaceful, but the memory of what happened there remains. It remains in the stories told by veterans. It remains in the history books. It remains in the hearts of those who understand that freedom is not free, and that sometimes in the darkest moments, one person's courage can light the way for everyone else. Leonard Funk did not set out to be a hero. He set out to be a good soldier, a good sergeant, and a good man. But when the moment came, when death pressed a gun into his stomach and demanded surrender, he chose defiance. He chose laughter. He chose violence. And he chose life for his men. That is the measure of a hero, not the medals, not the glory, but the choice to stand when everyone else would fall, to fight when everyone else would flee, and to protect others even at the cost of your own life. In the end, the lesson of Leonard Funk is simple. Courage is not about being unafraid. It is about acting despite fear. Leadership is not about rank. It is about trust. And heroism is not about being special. It is about being willing to do what is necessary when it is necessary, no matter the cost. Funk understood that. He lived it. And in 45 seconds on a frozen morning in Belgium, he proved it beyond any doubt. The Germans who survived Holzheim told their own version of the story after the war. They said the American sergeant was insane, that no sane man would laugh when surrounded by 90 armed soldiers. But they were wrong. Funk was not insane. He was something far more dangerous. He was a man who refused to accept defeat. And in war, that refusal is the most powerful weapon of all. Today, the 82nd Airborne Division still tells the story of Leonard Funk. New paratroopers hear it during training. Officers study it in leadership courses. Veterans remember it at reunions. It is a story that does not fade because it speaks to something fundamental about the human spirit. It says that we are not defined by the challenges we face, but by how we respond to them. It says that in the darkest moments, when hope seems lost and death seems certain, there is always a choice. We can surrender or we can fight. We can give in or we can stand up. We can accept defeat or we can laugh in its face and refuse to quit. Leonard Funk made his choice. He chose to fight. And because he did, his men went home. That is all that mattered to him. That is all that matters now. The weight of what happened to Holzheim did not fully settle on Funk until days later. In the immediate aftermath, there was no time for reflection. The war continued. His company pushed east, clearing villages, engaging scattered German units, and racing toward the Siegfried Line. Every day brought new firefights, new casualties, new moments where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Funk moved through it all with the same calm professionalism that had defined his service since North Africa. He checked his men, distributed ammunition, planned patrols, and led from the front. But at night, when the shooting stopped and the darkness closed in, he thought about the German officer's face, the split second before the Thompson roared and the bodies in the snow. He did not regret his decision. Regret requires doubt, and Funk had none. He knew he had done the only thing possible. But knowing something is right and living with the consequences of violence are two different things. Funk had killed before. He had killed in Sicily when German paratroopers tried to overrun his position. He had killed in Italy during the brutal mountain fighting around Monte Cassino. He had killed in Normandy when his platoon was pinned down by machine gun fire, and he flanked the position alone, throwing grenades and firing until the gun went silent. Every time, the killing was necessary. Every time, it saved lives. But it never became easy. It never stopped weighing on him. This is one of the unspoken truths of combat. The men who fight well, who lead well, who do what must be done under fire, are often the ones who carry the heaviest burden afterward. They do not talk about it. They do not complain. They simply carry it day after day, year after year, until the weight becomes part of who they are. Funk carried Holzheim the same way he carried every other fight, quietly, without fuss, without seeking sympathy or understanding. It was his burden, and he bore it. The men who were there, the ones who saw Funk laugh and then unleash hell, reacted differently. Some were in awe. They could not believe what they had witnessed. They told the story again and again, each time adding small details, polishing it into legend. Others were shaken. They had seen men die before, but never like that Never so fast, never with such sudden and absolute violence. A few struggled with nightmares, replaying the moment in their minds, wondering what would have happened if Funk had hesitated, if the German officer had pulled the trigger first, if the chaos had gone the other way. But all of them, every single man who was there, understood one thing. Funk had saved their lives. The German counterattack force had not come to Holzheim to take prisoners. They had come to retake the town and use it as a base to strike at the American rear. If they had succeeded, Company C would have been surrounded, cut off, and destroyed. Funk's refusal to surrender, his decision to fight, had stopped that. He had not just saved 4 men. He had saved the entire company. And in doing so, he had kept the American advance moving, kept the pressure on the retreating Germans, and helped shorten the war. This is the ripple effect of courage. One action, one decision, one moment of defiance can change the course of events far beyond the immediate situation. Funk did not think about strategy or the big picture when he pulled the trigger. He thought about his men. But his men were part of company, and that company was part of a regiment, and that regiment was part of a division, and that division was part of an army that was grinding down the Third Reich day by day, mile by mile, life by life. Every small victory mattered. Every successful defense mattered. Every moment when a soldier chose to fight instead of surrender mattered. Funk's moment mattered more than most. The weeks after Holzheim blurred together. Company C crossed the Siegfried Line, fought to the Dragon's Teeth anti-tank obstacles, and entered Germany itself. The enemy resistance stiffened. The closer the Allies got to the heart of the Reich, the harder the Germans fought. Funk's platoon took casualties. Men he had trained with, fought with, bled with, died in muddy fields and shattered towns whose names he could barely pronounce. Each loss hit him hard, but he did not let it show. He could not afford to. His men needed him to be steady, confident, unshakable. So that is what he was, even when he felt anything but. In early April, as the Allied armies encircled the Ruhr and the German war machine collapsed, Funk received word that he was being pulled off the line. He did not know why at first. Orders were orders. He turned over command of his platoon to his most experienced corporal, packed his gear, and reported to division headquarters. There, a colonel he had never met shook his hand and told him he was being recommended for the Medal of Honor. Funk did not know what to say. He had heard of the Medal of Honor. Of course, every soldier had, but he had never imagined receiving it. He asked if his men would be recognized too. The colonel said they would receive appropriate commendations, but that the Medal of Honor was reserved for actions that went above and beyond the call of duty, actions that exemplified the highest ideals of courage and sacrifice. Funk nodded, thanked the colonel, and asked to return to his unit. The colonel said no. The paperwork was already in motion. Funk would remain at headquarters until the process was complete. Funk hated it. He hated being away from his men. He hated the clean uniforms, the hot meals, the safety of a rear. He hated feeling like he was being celebrated while his friends were still fighting and dying. But he followed orders. He gave a statement. He answered questions. He waited. And in May, when Germany surrendered and the guns finally fell silent, he allowed himself to believe, for the first time in years, that he might actually survive the war. The journey home was long and surreal. Funk sailed from Europe in June, part of a convoy of troop ships carrying thousands of veterans back to the United States. The men on board were loud, jubilant, drunk with relief. They sang songs, played cards, told exaggerated stories, and counted the days until they would see their families again. Funk joined in, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the men who were not on the ship, the ones who would never come home. He thought about the German soldiers he had killed, and whether any of them had families waiting for news that would never come. He thought about Holzheim, and the officer who had smiled and pressed a gun into his stomach, and the laugh that had bought him a second of life. When the ship docked in New York, the city erupted in celebration. Ticker tape parades, crowds cheering, strangers grabbing soldiers and kissing them, thanking them, crying with joy. Funk slipped away from the chaos as quickly as he could. He took a train to Pennsylvania, walked the last mile to his parents' house, and knocked on the door. His mother opened it, saw him standing there in his uniform with his duffel bag, and burst into tears. His father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, pulled him into a hug and held him for a long time. They did not ask about the war. They did not need to. They could see it in his eyes. Funk spent the summer of 1945 adjusting to civilian life. It was harder than he expected. The world had moved on while he was gone. Friends had married, started families, found jobs. The war was over, and everyone wanted to forget it, to focus on the future, to rebuild and move forward. But Funk could not move forward yet. He was still back there, in the snow and the mud, in the burning towns and frozen forests. He woke up at night hearing gunfire. He flinched at loud noises. He could not stand crowds. He felt disconnected, like he was watching his own life from a distance. In September, he traveled to Washington, D.C. for the Medal of Honor ceremony. President Truman stood in the White House and draped the medal around Funk's neck, while photographers snapped pictures and reporters scribbled notes. Truman shook his hand and said something about duty and honor and the pride of a grateful nation. Funk smiled, said thank you, and thought about the men who should have been standing there with him. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. Afterward, there were handshakes, congratulations, a formal dinner. Funk endured it all with the same quiet professionalism he had shown in combat. But he was relieved when it was over and he could go home. The Medal of Honor changed his life in ways he did not anticipate. Newspapers ran stories about him. Magazines published profiles. Veterans groups invited him to speak at events. Strangers recognized him on the street and wanted to shake his hand. Funk did not enjoy the attention. He had never sought fame or recognition. He had simply done his job. But he understood that the medal was bigger than him. It represented every paratrooper who had jumped into enemy fire, every soldier who had held the line when retreat seemed easier, every man who had given his life so that others could come home. He wore the medal not for himself, but for them. Over the years, Funk spoke at schools, veterans halls, and military bases. He told the story of Holzheim, but he always emphasized the same points. He said that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. He said that leadership is not about rank or authority, but about taking care of the people who depend on you. He said that heroism is not about being special, but about being willing to do what is necessary when the moment demands it. And he said that every soldier who served, whether they received medals or not, deserved respect and gratitude. Funk lived a long life. He worked as a salesman, married, raised children, and became a grandfather. He attended reunions with the 82nd Airborne, where he was treated like royalty by younger generations of paratroopers who had grown up hearing his story. He visited memorials and cemeteries, laying wreaths at the graves of men he had served with. He never spoke much about the nightmares or the weight he carried. He believed that was private, something between him and the men who had been there. In 1992, Leonard Funk died peacefully at the age of 72. His funeral was attended by hundreds of veterans, active duty soldiers, and family members. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. A bugler played taps. A rifle team fired a 3-volley salute. The flag that had draped his coffin was folded and presented to his widow. And as the mourners filed past his grave, more than one paused to whisper, "Thank you, Sergeant." The story of Leonard Funk endures because it is more than a war story. It is a story about the human spirit, about the capacity for ordinary people to do extraordinary things when the stakes are highest. It is a reminder that courage is not reserved for few, but available to anyone who chooses to stand up when others would fall, to fight when others would flee, to protect others even at great personal cost. Funk's laugh at Holzheim has become legendary, a symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. But the laugh was not the most important part of the story. The most important part was what came next. The decision to act, the refusal to accept defeat, the commitment to his men that transcended fear and logic. That is the essence of leadership. That is the essence of courage. And that is why Leonard Funk's name will be remembered as long as people tell stories about heroes.